Hello, everybody. This is Rob Frenette with the podcast HODGEPOD. Welcome back for another episode. And I have a great guest on for today. Bruce Stock joins me on HODGEPOD, and he is a Canadian veteran, a novelist, and also he has 60 years of public affairs experience, but he has a whole lot more to talk about. And Bruce Stock, welcome to HODGEPOD.
Rob, great to be with you and your listeners, sir. Thanks very much.
I always like to have my guests introduce themselves. So if you would, just give an introduction, and then we'll talk about your career, which is vast and really interesting.
Okay, well, as you implied, I've been exceptionally fortunate with the way my life has unfolded, and it's got to the point where after my military career, my public affairs career, my writing career, I've now decided that my occupation is writer igniter. So that's where I am now, and I'm really enjoying the challenge of creating unexpected bestsellers, and we can talk about that subject at your leisure as we go along. But I guess one of the easy subjects for us to chat about tonight is my novel Switch Pitcher, which is the story of how one man changed the national pastime from both sides of the mound.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let's talk about that. So we were talking before we came on about an ambidextrous baseball player. I know there's switch hitters in baseball, but when you say ambidextrous, that's throwing from both arms, each side, right?
Correct.
And that's hard to do.
Is it ever? Is it ever? And for many years, I kept asking people, how come baseball has switch hitters, but they don't have switch pitchers? And people wouldn't be able to answer, and neither would I. So I just kept thinking about it, and then finally it dawned on me that when you think about what a pitcher, with whichever arm is dominant, has to do in order to become a professional or major league status, he has trained the muscle memory of so many different muscles in order to achieve that competence that it's absolutely amazing. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to become ambidextrous, you have to do it on both sides of your body. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what gave me the idea that if a young boy was raised by, let's say, a couple of athletes, maybe they were college athletes, but they decide when they're playing with him as a baby that he rolls the ball back to them sometimes with his right,
Yeah.
sometimes with his left, and the light goes on. They said, "Gee, was our kid's ambidextrous?" And so they both decide as athletes, because they recognize that when an athlete is ambidextrous, it's a distinct advantage regardless of the sport. So they realize they have to wait until he's 5 so he can understand. And then they say to him, Carter, would you like to do something that nobody else in the world has ever done? So his eyebrows go up and he said, "What's that?" And and they say, "Well, if you want, mom and dad will teach you how to throw a baseball from with both arms." So he really likes the sound of that. He says, "Wow, gee, can you do that?" And they said, "Well, we sure can. We'll train you as you grow up. But there's only one rule, Carter, and that is you can throw the ball as many times a day as you want to mom or dad. You can throw 10 or you can throw 100, but never from the same side twice." So that's how he grows up, building the musculature on both sides of his body. Then when he's 13, they discover he's got rare vision. It's 20/5. That means that he can see from 20 feet what a person with normal vision can see from 5 feet. So now he's standing on the pitcher's mound looking at the batter, and he can see every single pore on that worried batter's face. And that's his fuel. And so that's why when he breaks into the bigs, the batters can't hit him. They're all psyched out, and he turns baseball upside down.
Before we got on, I mentioned to you I grew up in the north of Boston in the early 90s. There was a pitcher for the Red Sox, Greg Harris. I believe he, don't know if I didn't look it up, but I know that they did have stories on him that he was ambidextrous, that he could pitch, but I don't know if he ever pitched. But don't you think, though, like if a pitcher did that, I mean, he could probably have a sore elbow and he could come back the next night and pitch left-handed and still, come back with the same heat and the curveballs, and that'd be a great advantage. I'm surprised that hasn't happened more at all.
Well, you're right, but it just shows you what the resistance to change and innovation is. The other thing about switch pitching, Rob, is that it's the last frontier of baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else has been identified and developed, but not switch pitching. And one of the questions he's asked in a post-game scrum is, don't you get a bit tired? And he said, no, because I'm not overtaxing one side of my body or one arm more than the other. It's always being shared. So he ends up having twice the endurance of a regular pitcher.
When we're just talking about baseball, I know there's switch hitters. I know when I was growing up, there was a ton of switch hitters, but I don't know if I can name like 5 switch hitters in the game of baseball now. I may be way off base. I don't follow as much as I did. I still watch it religiously, but I don't know. Are there a lot of switch hitters in baseball? Because
it's very common.
Okay, it still is common. Okay, I don't mean to sound like a novice, but very rarely do I see that. So
no, it's common, and your commentators, your play-by-plays, and your color announcers have all the stats on how often he bats from the right and how often from the left, and what his stats are. And of course, they've got the same stats for the pitchers with their success pitching to righties or lefties.
Mm-hmm. And then we have the switch hitters, and then we have Ohtani for LA killing it with his pitching, and then one of the greatest hitters in the last 5 or 7 years that he's been in baseball.
Yeah.
And so the last frontier is the ambidextrous pitcher. But that's when you think about it, about a month ago, I was watching the anniversary of the Roger Clemens 20 strikeout game in 1986.
Okay.
And I was watching. They had the highlights, condensed, and he could not get hit that night. I mean, he was throwing heat, and the Mariners just got like frozen every pitch, and it's like, why didn't they swing the bat? But that night, for one night, he was on, and he struck out 20 of 27 batters. That's an amazing feat.
Now, was he a Blue Jay at the time?
No, he was with the Red Sox. That was in '86.
Okay.
That was in '86 when they went to the World Series against the Mets.
Right.
And there was only, at that time in April, there was only about 13,000 people at Fenway Park because it was cool that night.
Okay.
And one of the players on the Mariners was Spike Owen, who ended up getting traded to the Red Sox later that year.
Okay.
So and they played together at Texas too. So just a little inside baseball there. But yeah, that was fascinating. But he was with the Red Sox, and then he went to the Blue Jays in the early '90s and really tore it up there as well.
Yeah. Right.
So you're in Canada, so you've had quite the career. So you served. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. My ancestors are from the Montreal area, but is it the aide de camp to Governor General George Vanier from '64 to '66? Did I pronounce that right?
Oh yes, it's aide de camp is the it's a rank, and his name was Vanier.
Vanier. Okay, I got you.
Vanier.
Okay.
Yeah. And he was an ex-soldier. So I was a young infantry officer when I was interviewed for the position. And so when I met him, I was just thunderstruck because he was tall and distinguished, and just the perfect image of a distinguished officer who had dedicated his life to serving his country. He'd lost his right leg in the First World War in France, but refused to be evacuated back home because his regiment was still fighting, and he would not leave because of that. So he went through life with an artificial right leg, and which meant that he walked a little more slowly, but it was a very stately manner. And he and his wife were just two very exceptionally dignified people. And now they're described in our historical references as the most revered viceregal couple that Canada ever had. And lucky me, I lived and worked in their residence at Rideau Hall. That's our White House for 2 years. So, that was my big break in life, and I've never a day goes by without I think of some, or I have some little reminders sort of jog my memory of how fortunate I am to. And of course, when you see that position, Rob, is both the senior civilian and the senior military position in our country, because in addition to being the governor general, he's also the commander in chief.
Hmm.
So you're working for the top two jobs in the country, and you're an aide de camp, which is a personal, highly confident assistant. And so not only are you hearing information and details about highly discreet and sometimes secret subjects,
Wow.
uh, but you see how the country operates. You see where the centers of power are. You see who the people are. What sort of people are they? Where are they from? What's their background like? What are their characteristics? Why are they such good leaders? And you're not only seeing the political leaders, but the business leaders, the cultural leaders. So it's an introduction to how your country functions that just has no equal.
Hmm. So also, Canada's new flag was inaugurated for the first time. And what was that in 1965?
Correct. Yes, in a cold winter's day in February 65. And I had the privilege of being on duty with the Governor General. He was inaugurating it, of course, with our Prime Minister. And so there I was on duty that day as our beautiful new flag unfolded for the very first time in front of about 10,000 people on Parliament Hill. And what a sight to see the flag slowly unfolding. And then
Hmm.
when it finally came into full view, it was just absolutely, inspiring. And my situation is that hardly a day goes by when I don't see a Canadian flag, and it brings back all those
Yeah.
those memories.
Yeah, flags are very important for countries. I know here in the States we have our stars and stripes, but
Yep,
the flag brings out lots of
yep,
pride. The
it
different
does.
putting all political bullcrap aside, the
Yep,
flag the flag is what defines us in our countries, and it's a sense of pride for people who care about their country. That's just my soapbox moment right here, but the flag is so important. The Canadian flag, when they play sports with Canadian teams, they start off with the Canadian national anthem, and then they do the American. When
yeah,
U.S. teams go to Canada, they play the
the
U.S. and
Americans. Yep,
Canadian. So
right.
it just shows that there is some congruence there between us and you guys up in the north.
Exactly. And you've really touched on a fabulous issue, because for a long time recently, I've been trying to figure out, gee, how can we let Americans know that we understand very, very clearly that when it comes to friendships, they're just like our national flags, they fly above politics.
Hmm.
So I knew that if I was going to fashion a message to Americans expressing those thoughts, that it had to be positive, authentic, and interesting. It took me a while. But then I suddenly remembered, gee whiz, our national flag has a voice. So why doesn't it write a letter to Old Glory?
Hmm.
So that's what I've done. And I'm now ready to share that with you and your listeners if you think it's
Yeah, go ahead,
interest.
please. Yes, please go
Okay,
ahead.
well, okay. So now I'm just going to leave the screen for a minute and find it on my
You take
iPad.
your
Okay.
time. You take your
Right.
time. Yeah, I just had to get on my soapbox there. I'm tired of sometimes the politics. People forget why we're here for our country. So that's my soapbox moment.
Well, I love it. And let's face it. Right now, the political the noise of the political thing is sort of drowned out everything else.
Yeah.
So here's the letter to Old Glory, excuse me. On the occasion of America's 250th anniversary, a neighbor's flag writes to Old Glory. Dear Old Glory, I know. It's very unusual for one flag to write another. So I sure hope you can overlook my reaching out this way. But as I fly above Canada's Peace Tower in Ottawa, I think, gee, isn't it just common courtesy to compliment your neighbor on celebrating their 250th anniversary? And when I think of how well you have served American sovereignty through thick and thin since 1776, I am in awe of what you have achieved. After all, thick and thin since 1776, from the Declaration of Independence to the Civil Rights Movement to now, you have been the symbol of the people's unwavering commitment to liberty. I am truly impressed. As I look out from my privileged perch, 302 feet above our Parliament buildings, I have lots of time to think about how fortunate national symbols are as we remind our citizens every day of their sovereignty and the blessings they enjoy. And in our case, the way we have come to each other's support over the decades, as in World War II, Korea, 9/11, and last year's wildfires on both sides of the borders tells a story. There lies a neighborly relationships that now, thanks to the celestial success of Artemis II, is truly out of this world and the envy of other nations. I also think how hard we work, day and night, fair weather or foul, always on the job. Come to think of it, the only being I know of that works harder than we do is the sun, but I'm not complaining. And as I try and imagine how you must be feeling after 250 years of devotion to America, it occurs to me that the true reward of our unique calling is that we fly above our nation's politics. And in the end, when all is said and done, regardless of what has transpired, there we are for all our people to see, flying true and free. In closing, I salute your magnificent example, Old Glory. Around the world, you are known, and at home, you are cherished for serving your country's sovereignty with distinction. When it comes to flags of the world, you are in a class by yourself. My warmest respects, Maple Leaf.
That was beautiful. That was awesome. That
Thank
was
you.
awesome. That was
Thank you.
awesome. You know what? Yeah, the flags stand high above all the politics, and they just have their own, I guess, view of each other. That way, they're above the fray, and I love that. That's awesome. I've never
That's
thought of it
great.
that way. Yes,
I'll,
they're
I'll
they're
send you.
above
I'll
the
send.
fray.
Well, Rob, thank you very much. You're very kind, and you and I are obviously developing a bit of a rapport here, and that's because we're kindred spirits.
Well, people, back in the World War II, when the U.S. forces went into Germany and defeated Germany, it was the American flag. It was the Americans with other countries, but it was the Americans who
Led the
liberated
way.
Europe, liberated France, all
Yep.
those, and I think that gets forgotten sometimes. But hey, I'm
Yep.
not a political commentator, but that's just my take on it. I
Sure.
wish we could get away from the politics, all the
Yep.
screaming and yelling. And I remember in 1975, I was 10 years old. I remember the 200th, the bicentennial. I
Sure.
remember the tall ships in New York City, New York,
Yep. Right.
Faneuil Hall. And now
Sure.
it's like the 250th. It's like it's totally, totally different.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's for sure. But I just wanted our American friends and neighbors to know that we really appreciate you.
Yeah, Canada's a great country. I've been to Montreal, Quebec City, and Vancouver on the western side. Canada is a huge country.
Is it ever? Well, we've got three coasts, for goodness sake. Aren't we lucky?
Three coasts.
Well, yeah, if you count the Arctic
Okay,
Ocean. Yeah,
I got you. Okay, see, you got me on that one. So I got to learn my geography.
not to worry. You're in good shape.
So talk about you were deployed to Bosnia in 1993 as a public affairs officer with the Canadian peacekeepers. I remember the Bosnia Herzegovina conflicts in the early 90s.
Okay.
Uh, what was that like being in Bosnia during that time? Did you ever fear for your safety or what was going on around you?
Well, when you hear a bullet bounce off your APC that you knew was meant for you and it goes whizzing past your ear, it tends to affect your sphincter.
Oh my gosh, I'd
Yeah.
freak out.
Yeah, well, and that happens on more than one occasion. But the other thing with a UN operation like that, you understand that you're there to save the elderly and the kids. The middle-aged busy, people, especially the men, are too busy trying to kill each other. But you're there as a member of the United Nations to save the lives of the elderly and the young generations. And it's when you've got three belligerents, as we did in Bosnia, with the Serbs, the Croats, and the Bosniaks, then it's a triangle. And as you probably learned in life, a triangle when it comes to human relations never ever works. And
Yes.
and 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 what would happen in Bosnia is that things would be going along absolutely smoothly. Just let me turn off my alarm
Oh,
here,
sure, no problem.
and things would be going along very well. And then one belligerent would accuse the UN of working with the other two against them. And so everything would have to stop until we got it all sorted out. And then we'd be back to normal and things would be working beautifully. And then another belligerent in the other corner would say, "Oh, you bastards, you're working with the other two against us." And it just kept rotating like that. So it was a hopeless situation. And that's why NATO came in and took over from the United Nations. And when that happened, I was working as a public information officer with the UN, not the Canadian peacekeepers, and be damned if Dan Rather didn't arrive
Oh,
to
really? Dan
to
Rather?
report. Yeah, and my situation is that as a Canadian growing up, because I was interested in public affairs and news, I would often watch the CBS Evening News. So I knew all about Dan Rather's career as an anchor. So when I arrived in Bosnia with the United Nations International Police Task Force, I was in a perfect position when the change was made to NATO because the news media were some of the first representatives to come in, including a CBS crew. So I kept feeding them stories about what the hell was going on that would help them cover how things are unfolding. And because of that, the phone rang one day, and when I answered, the voice said, "The man is coming."
Wow.
And I knew who they meant. And I said, "Son of a gun, Dan Rather's coming. Give me 30 minutes and I'll call you back with an offer you can't refuse." And he said, "Done." We both hung up. So then I went to see my people at the UN and I said, "We have this incredible opportunity to help educate one of the most important news anchors in America about the situation here and what NATO is going to experience when they come in to take over. And so I want a military briefing and I want a civilian briefing. And here are the two people that I'd like to do the briefing for Mr. Rather." And everybody in the head shop agreed. And the military briefing was from a Pakistani colonel, and he was very competent. But the real secret I had up my sleeve was an African prince, and his name was Tidian Sear. But he'd gone to Stanford as a youngster and grew up in America, so he was very familiar with Dan Rather.
Hmm.
But TD&C, Rob, I tell you not, he had a look that was so intense, it made you afraid to look away. Because when he looked at you, you just hope you could still keep breathing. And that's who I chose to brief Dan on the civilian side of the UN operation. And as it turned out, the two hit it off because they both realized during the briefing that they were two very rare individuals with unique knowledge and understanding of their areas of interest and authority. And so it was a fabulous briefing that Dan Rather got. And he must have liked it because after he took off back to New York, I got 2 bottles, not one, but two.
Nice. Because while you were talking, I was looking up Dan Rather. He was the number one newscaster in the 1980s,
Yep,
won that time slot. And I can remember watching watching the 7 o'clock news on the East Coast with CBS. Then you watch Tom Brokaw. We had VCRs back then. So I was a news junkie back then, still am now. I like to watch both sides. But that was like must see
sure,
television back then, seeing like Dan Rather and Tom Brokaw
sure.
for that 30 minutes. They were on for 24
Yep,
minutes, 6 minutes commercials, and you got your
yep,
news, and that was the trusted voice.
exactly. Yep. And it all started with Walter Cronkite, or maybe Ed Murrow during World War II.
Yeah, Ed
This is
Murrow.
this is London calling.
Man, I'll tell you what, the nostalgia with our former news anchors is really awesome because Dan Rather was just the way he delivered the news. He just had that, I don't know, that but not authoritative, but that sense of respect and credibility when you got he was on the air for 24 years
Yep,
and ended in 2005, March of 2005. Man, that
that's
just
right.
seems that's not too long ago.
No, have you noticed his successor these days?
Well, I don't watch the evening news as much as I used to.
Okay.
I watch NBC nightly news.
Yeah. Okay. Tom
So but
Lamis.
he is Dan Rather's doing this thing I think on Access TV,
Oh
and
yeah.
he interviews rock stars from back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s,
Yeah.
and it's pretty interesting. I like watching some. He had guys on from the Eagles, Sammy Hagar. So he does some research, and I really like his interviews. It's kind of like outside his
Sure.
his old news, but
Yeah.
he's got to be in his 90s, I think, right?
It wouldn't surprise me. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, man, oh man, Dan Rather, what a voice too.
Exactly.
90, he's 92 years old, still
Wow.
going. It's awesome.
I agree.
So talk about also, you have had a run with as a part of the media team that produced the content seen on Hockey Night in Canada. So for those here in the States,
Yep.
that's like the ESPN in Canada, right?
Yes, indeed. Yep. And Don Cherry had a very popular program or a segment in that broadcast called Coach's Corner.
Uh-huh.
And of course, Don Cherry, bless his heart, was also very pro military, and he loved the whole concept of service to country. And while I was there, I found out that one of my colleagues with the Northern Battle Group in Bosnia had already done 25 interviews for the Stanley Cup and sent them to Hockey Night in Canada. And when I heard that, my heart sank because I knew I couldn't generate another 25 hockey interviews because that would be too many for the system, and that they would reject mine or reject half of my buddies, and that my hands were tied, and I was really in a bad place because all those guys would get the media exposure. So I scratched my head and decided that, gee whiz, what I have to do is I have to come up with a phony sports report. And the way I'll do it, the way I'll shape it, is that there is tremendous rivalry between the Maple Leaf fans who are peacekeepers and the Montreal Canadian peacekeepers who are fans. And they were actually serving in the same base at the same time. So their what's the word, dislike for each other was pretty straight, pretty intense. So I created this phony sports report that it was so bad that the commanding officer had to declare a green zone in the men's canteen. And so I wrote a sports cast in English and French, and found a good looking Vendu, or that's a French Canadian officer, to be the sports commentator. And I had 3 Betacam cameras, Rob. and the sergeant technicians with me. So I was like my own TV news producer for 6 months. It was fabulous.
Man.
So we had and of course with the Sony Betacam camera, it's broadcast quality that you get. So what it meant was that when we shot that phony sports report and sent it back to Canada, the chances were that they would like the quality, and all they had to do was a little bit of editing. So that's what we arranged. We shot it in English and French because in Canada you have to do that, and we sent it back to Toronto to Don Cherry's attention at Hockey Night in Canada, and I forgot about it because I was in the middle of a war, so I forgot about it. And then one night on a satellite phone call to headquarters in Ottawa, as we're signing off, the guy says, "Oh, and by the way, congratulations, Don Cherry showed your sports report at Coach's Corner last night. We we figured the audience was 2.3 million, and that's a record." So so I went to bed a happy camper that night.
That's awesome. Well, when you watch hockey on TV,
Yep.
it's totally different than seeing it in person. In
Oh yeah.
person, it's intense, it's quick,
Yeah.
it's more it's the ice doesn't look as big because it's so
Sure.
condensed, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I grew up in just north of Boston, so we had season tickets for the Bruins in the early '80s, and we'd see the Canadians play the Bruins, and that was an intense rivalry.
Oh sure.
Oh my
Right.
gosh,
Yeah.
the venom that we had against the Montreal Canadiens was like the Yankees and the Red Sox. The
Yeah.
Canadians were like Larry Robinson, Bob Gainey, Guy
Yeah.
Lafleur, Ken
Right.
Dryden. They were like the enemy. It
Oh
was
yeah.
awesome.
Sure. Yeah. The world's most fastest and most violent game.
Yeah, and in the mid '90s, I had a chance to see Mario Lemieux play and Eric Lindros. And Eric
Really.
Lindros, every time I saw him play, anytime he was on the ice, I watch him. He was so massive on that ice, and
Yeah.
I always wondered why he never dominated. But I know he had concussion issues. But
Yes.
Eric Lindros was one of my favorite players to follow
Sure.
when he was in his prime. He was enormous. He was unbelievably big.
Wasn't he? Exactly. And for a man of his size to be so agile was just amazing.
Oh God, and he had a mean streak that was just insane. I mean, he would check people on the boards, and it was like, how did that guy get up from getting smashed into the boards by Lindros? And like Mario Lemieux, he was the same size, but he wasn't physical. He was a tremendous player. I mean, unbelievable. Mario Lemieux was just like off the charts. Like Wayne Gretzky, can't forget Wayne Gretzky either.
Yeah.
But
Right.
Mario Lemieux had size too, and I know he went out with an illness, and then he came back after a hiatus, and he scored
Yeah.
one or two goals in his
Yeah.
comeback game. That was
Yeah.
inspiring.
It was. It was. Yeah. Well, you're lucky to have been raised in such a combined sports heaven that was so committed to baseball and hockey.
Oh yeah, and then we had the Celtics,
Yeah.
and then we
Well,
had
there you go. Three.
and then the Patriots weren't that good back then in the '80s and
Okay.
'90s, but now they've had that dynasty. We had that dynasty run, but
Sure.
growing up in Massachusetts was great because you got all four pro sports teams. It was amazing. I wouldn't trade it for the world growing up there. So
Rob, maybe it's time to write a sports novel about a quarterback who's ambidextrous.
yeah,
Hey?
yeah. You know what? I may have to do that. Might have to prolong his career a little bit.
Yeah.
So go back to when you briefed Dan Rather. So what was he like? Did you meet him? What was he like?
Well, I was surprised because I thought he might have been a little more, what's the word, imperious, because, he was in charge of a very large news organization, and
Hmm.
his credibility rested on his knowledge of facts and his ability to persuade. And so I thought that he might have been a bit austere and difficult to work with, but he was the opposite. He was open and
Wow.
warm, and he knew that in terms of this particular subject, the United Nations operation in Bosnia Herzegovina, that he was a novice and that there was a great deal to learn. And so getting somebody in our position ready to brief him to the max, he knew that he was getting just the sort of support that would enhance his credibility. So he was a delight to work with.
That's an awesome story because you just never know how people are going to react or
Yeah, you're right.
uh, collaborate. But that's great to know because
Yeah,
back then I don't know about today in the news, but people in the news did research, and I don't know how that is now with all the AI and all the things we have now with technology. But back then, you still had to dig for stories and dig for facts.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So what's the consensus of you read that nice little vignette about the two American flag and the Canadian flag. So what's like the feeling of people in Canada towards the Americans, us here down here?
Well, I don't know that I can necessarily speak for all Canadians, but I know enough of my fellow Canadians who have a lot of friends in America who just don't want to allow politics to spoil the friendship.
I got you.
And
Perfect.
and of course that's why we want to assure our friends and neighbors that we clearly accept and understand that friendships are above politics, and we look forward to maintaining them and continuing them.
Hmm.
That would be
Yeah.
my 25 cents analysis.
Yeah. Well, we go to work like people in Canada do every day. We have families. We love sports. We love
Yep,
music. So
a lot,
I
a
think
lot.
I think we have a lot in common.
Exactly, exactly.
We
And
have a
we
lot in.
oh, and we also appreciate each other. My military career in the Reg Forces was with the famous Canadian Infantry Regiment, and we were the only Canadian unit to receive the President of the United States Distinguished Unit Emblem because of our role in Korea during the
Mm,
Battle of Pyongyang. And we were involved with a U.S. medium tank battalion and an Australian artillery regiment to save the UN line because the Chinese had overrun us, and
mm,
if we were going to escape and regroup, we had to save this one particular avenue to allow the Allies to escape through it, and that was what we did. The three units, and as a result of that, we were all awarded the president's DUE.
the Korean War was pretty. It was
Savage.
pretty severe as well. I mean, people talk about Vietnam and World War II, but the Korean War was, you
Yep,
know, no any war is bad, but
that's true. But the difference, perhaps, to some of our veterans in my regiment, according to their stories, Rob, was that the Chinese masses were just so mind destroying that those numbers had never been experienced in World War II the way they were in Korea.
Mhm.
And that we were able to survive and get out alive after being completely overrun. It got so bad that in one of my regiment's position, the company commander had to call down artillery fire on his own position. But because our guys were, in their foxholes underground, that artillery fire was exactly what we needed to clear out the Chinese who were dominating, but they were completely exposed, so that artillery fire was very effective and saved us. But it's pretty rare for any commander to call down artillery on his own position.
Have you ever been to the DMZ?
No, no,
Isn't that amazing that after all these years, it's still in active and
yeah,
still it's fascinating when you look at like
yeah,
North Korea and South Korea opposite
right.
sides, and they're just looking at each other, and it's really amazing. After all these years, it's still as tense as it is and as it was 60 years ago, or longer.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, let's hope that we can work our way out of it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've seen some video of the DMZ there, and it's quite
Right.
fascinating that they're both looking at each other, and it's
Yep.
quite remarkable. So, I guess you wouldn't trade anything that you've done with all your experience, right? Because you have so much to look back on, and you've written novels, and you've done so much. So, what's one item that you look back at your life and you say, "Wow, that really changed me"?
Oh, well, I'm just exceptionally gifted because it would be my time with the Vaniers.
Hmm.
It changed my life and shaped me and my attitude towards the future. And of course, my parents were my first mentors, and how fortunate I was to have been raised by them. Dad was a Second World War hero, and mother was a fabulous. She's the the source of my success as a writer, because she was a voracious reader, and but in addition to doing the reading, she would always tell us what she was reading and tell these stories. So I grew up thinking that that's what people did. They read a lot and they talked a lot and they told stories. So, so if I have any way with words, it's because of my beautiful mother.
That's awesome. And your father was a World War II hero?
Yes, he was in a regiment called the Algonquin Regiment, based on First Nations here in Canada. And their claim to fame was that they helped liberate Holland at the end of the war. And so dad served in Holland and survived. And then after the Allies saved Holland and then got into Germany on their push to Berlin, that's when he won his medal for bravery. That's called the DSO, the Distinguished Service Order, and it's second only to the Victoria Cross for bravery. So when he came home, he was a local war hero.
That that's amazing. Did your father talk about World War II a lot?
Seldom, and the reason, of course, as a veteran, I can relate to it. But the reason the veterans don't talk about those experiences, Rob, is simply it reminds them of the worst time in their lives. You know,
Hmm.
they were looking at death and misery and a man's inhumanity to man directly in the face, and they didn't want to have to keep remembering that. So that's why they didn't talk about it. It was too hard on their mental health and their self-esteem. So in order to protect their self-esteem, they wouldn't talk about all those horrendous memories they had.
Hmm. You know, I was just thinking about, two of our former presidents that I can just think off the top of my head, John F. Kennedy and George H.W. Bush were in World War II, and JFK was part of the TT-109 rescue.
Yep.
They got torpedoed by the Japanese, and there's actual footage of George H.W. Bush when he got shot down. They had video of him going up on the submarine, which is fascinating when you look back at hear those stories in that video that they were our presidents. It's amazing.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. But thank goodness they were there and doing what they did. And in Canada, it's very common for someone, when they learn that you're a veteran, for them to say thank you for your service.
I do that all the time. Anytime I see a veteran that has a hat on, a
Yep.
veteran World War II,
Yep.
Vietnam, I thank them
Right.
for their service. If I see somebody in their uniform, I thank them for their service because
Yep.
it goes a long way. So we
Well
have
said.
to, you
Well
know,
said.
I don't miss a beat to do that because that's
Good.
it's quite something.
Good man. Thank you.
And so it's really we've had a tremendous talk here. Talk about your book again on the ambidextrous pitcher there. Talk about that if you would please, because
Sure.
that's cool.
Okay. Well, by all means, I think there's some logical parts of it that your listeners would be interested in. And the one of the early things that comes up in the book is the controversy that surrounds his unprecedented ability, and that ignited a league-wide firestorm because the opposing managers, the owners, as well as the national sports media questioned whether he had an unfair advantage that was sabotaging baseball's traditional batter pitcher dynamic. So the commissioner ended up having a meeting with the playing rules committee, And of course, that consisted of owners as well as former players. And he said, okay, you guys have to decide, is it fair or unfair? And should we ban switch pitching as having a negative effect on the game? And after a very thorough, heated discussion, they both, or I shouldn't say both, they unanimously agreed to accept it as the natural evolutionary counterpart to switch hitting. So that's
That's
all part.
cool.
Yeah, that's all part of the controversy. And of course, that controversy then generated threats because success bred mortal danger as far as Carter was concerned. Because on a Memorial Day game, one of the fans used a pocket laser to try and blind him. And so when it hit one of his eyes, he threw his glove up over his face. And because of his fabulous vision, through the cracks in his glove, he was able to see. And the guy was dumb enough to try it again. So he was able to see where this light was coming from. And so when the managers all rushed onto the field to see what had happened to him, he was able to say, well, look up there, look over there, look up there. There's the guy. So they were able to throw them out. And then in World Series Game 3, a sniper's rifle was remotely fired from the stadium roof. And it just missed him and blew a big hole in the pitcher's mound, resulting in an FBI investigation. And it revealed that the Cleveland Arrows had a bunch of sour players who hired the laser attacker. And then the FBI got the details on the snipers and the rifle because they hadn't removed the serial number from the rifle. So they were able to track it and find out that the guy was just a Yahoo, but he was all by himself. So they were able to arrest him, charge him, and restore public safety. So that was part of the menace that went along with the controversy. Then, of course, it's got a bit of romance in it. And that's because the team owner, Georgina Sternwheeler, has an exceptionally drop dead gorgeous executive assistant, and Carter Brown falls for her. Her name is Elspeth Hudson. And then they almost have a major problem because the club had a policy of no fraternizing between staff and players. But nobody told Carter Brown about it. So he asks Elspeth out to lunch, and she goes to lunch, and she sort of thought, well, gee whiz, they won't make a fuss about it. But then when Georgina, her boss, found out about it, she said, wait a minute, this is company policy. It's non-negotiable. So you really put me in a pickle here. But then in the process of an investigation, the boss found out that nobody had properly briefed Carter Brown. So he was unaware of this policy. So all of a sudden, she couldn't hammer Elspeth and Carter the way she hoped. And of course, the other thing that she was really conscious of is if I upset Carter Brown, there goes the rest of the World Series because he's the guy we're relying on for all this. So she says, well, look, if you guys agree to stay apart and just have a professional relationship, when the World Series is over, I'll speak to the board about changing the policy. So that's what saved the romance.
That's cool. That's awesome. And when you think about it, if there was like an unfair advantage, maybe one rule, if that ever happened, was if you had an ambidextrous pitcher, that he would have to pitch from one side in an inning and not switch sides to have switch. Like maybe that would probably be the only rule, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So I think that's cool. I love that. That's a great way. Where can you get it at?
Okay. Well, it's on Amazon.
Okay. Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. So we've had quite a discussion here, and I can say that us in the U.S., we love our Canadian neighbors. So us being at the street level, we get along. So I want to thank Bruce Stock for being my guest and taking some time to join me. This has been quite a remarkable conversation, Bruce, and I can't thank you enough.
Well, you're very kind, and I can say it's mutual. And if I may, as my gift to you and your listeners, I'm going to send you a copy of the Letter to Old Glory.